So good afternoon, everybody. We're going to make a start. I'm mindful there's quite a few people who will be joining us over the next few minutes, leaving one meeting, coming into the next one as it is at the moment. We've got a lot to get through this afternoon, so I'm gonna crack on. So my name's Nick Holding. I'm Improvement Manager with the Emergency Care Improvement Support Team. Let me just move my slides on. Apologies. My name's Nick Holding. I'm an Improvement Manager with the Emergency Care Improvement Support Team, and welcome back to the next in the series of the Line 16 Improvement Science sessions. As we usually do with these sessions, the chat room is open to any questions, any comments, any observations. Please let me know. We won't have a Q&A session for this session, but I will pick up any questions or comments later on after the session's finished and get back to you if you've got any questions or comments. Again, any feedback is always really appreciated as I sort of develop these sessions for you. So moving on, a quick reflection back on 2 months ago when I was last with you. Talked about Stephen Covey's quote there, begin with the end in mind, really important. We're going to touch on that a lot more in this session. We also talked about the reality of improvement journeys, and they aren't that linear start and finish that we often assume that they might be. We talked about Fred and Sue and how Fred is that stuck in red person, that doing person, how we can't get off the hamster wheel and have that reflection time, and Sue, who can't break free of the thinking and the reflection and actually launch into the actual doing work as well, the red work. We touched on very briefly about how our brain, our biological systems are perfectly designed to help us make decisions, and that we should probably learn to trust our gut instincts a bit more, because that's actually biologically there to help us. Last month we heard from Spencer, and Spencer talked about getting to the root cause of a problem rather than just dealing with the superficial. And there's very much what we're going to talk about today, about how we build a continuous improvement mindset and think more in terms of infinite thinking rather than finite thinking. And I'll talk a bit more about what I mean by that as we move through the session. So it got me thinking about what we mean and what we refer to when we think about quality improvement. And if you probably asked everybody on this call today what quality improvement meant, they probably have a slightly different interpretation or definition of what quality improvement is. I think it's changed over the years. It probably wasn't referred to as much as quality improvement was now. It was service improvement or continuous improvement. But quality improvement is quite ubiquitous across social media and research papers and other projects at the moment. And I think from my perspective, what I do see, it is that project element. There's a lot of quality improvement projects, and it's kind of replaced what we would probably do previously around audits. And for me, that's a bit of a problem. When we think of in quality improvement in terms of projects, there's a start and an end point, and we aren't talking about things in terms of continuous improvement, rather than we talk about things in terms of delivery of a certain number of aims, and there may not be opportunities to roll that out and continue that thinking beyond the initial project. And I picked up this research, really impressed by this research by Dr. Nicola Burgess from Warwick Business School. It's something called social network analysis, and it studies the interaction and interconnectivity between individuals who maybe have taken some training in improvement and quality improvement, and how they connect and relate to other people. This is an example of an organisation that was involved in that study, and it shows quite a dispersed nature to the improvement, quite a dispersed nature to the training, and then the interconnectedness and the linking in with other people to share and then to engage in that knowledge sharing opportunity to build and to continue to improve. So there's less here. It's quite dispersed. For me, this tells a story of an organisation that is probably heavily involved in training lots of people, but not necessarily thinking about how that training then translates into continuous improvement mindsets. It's fixed around the individual who's received the training. If you apply that to another organisation within the study, you can see a lot more connectivity and interconnectedness between the individuals and the learning and the sharing of that learning. And this will develop more of a continuous improvement mindset. And there's no surprise on this one that this organisation went into CQC outstanding level during the study, very much coalesced around individuals learning and training and developing that improvement methodology in a continuous way, rather than more of a sort of project based, where the individual has received some training and then probably gone off and done a small improvement project based on the training. So connectivity, how we think in more terms of continuous improvement rather than project based improvement, is what I'm trying to advocate today for this session. And many of you will know Simon Sinek. He wrote the Start With Why TED Talk, ubiquitous again across social media. The Golden Circle, many of you will know that. The book he wrote after that, I think, for me, is probably more of an interesting book and more of one that I'd sort of steer you towards. He talks about a finite mindset and an infinite mindset. And this finite mindset is more about efficiency. And we do get trapped into this kind of finite. It's quite intoxicating at times, hierarchical. It's driven towards achieving targets. It's probably based on what we can achieve this week or this month or this quarter. And it's not thinking in terms of what we want to achieve overall. And as he said here, that finite mindset is how do we get the most out of our people, my people. That's about efficiency. That's about drive towards a particular goal and an aim. The infinite mindset is how do we create the environment? How do we create that continuous improvement mindset, that environment where people are naturally will do their best to try and achieve the aims with a clear, bold and brave aims and objectives. The infinite mindset takes us beyond just short targets and percentage figures that tell us, well, have we achieved that or not? We're thinking more in terms of continuous improvement. So as we move through this, I started to think about where did this come from? Where did the management methodology that we have and we've got so addicted to across all industries, not just healthcare, but I obviously see it in healthcare quite a lot. And it is going back a little short history lesson around management methodologies. It really become embedded way back when through the thinkings of Henry Ford and Frederick Winslow Taylor. The management methodology of hierarchy and command and control, where individuals were tasked with becoming the most efficient they possibly can in a production line kind of way. Yes, this is very much relating to the automotive industry, but this has become prevalent across most industries now, and I still see it in healthcare, where individuals are tasked with completing their tasks on a repetitive basis to be as efficient as possible. And the decisions about how that is made are made by individuals at a senior level who come with the solutions and task the people to deliver them. And then to where Frederick Winslow Taylor came in was to make that as efficiently as possible. And that has become quite intoxicating for managers across all industries, but I also see it in healthcare. The problem with that is that back in Ford's time, this was a labour-based economy. People went to work, they got paid, they weren't interested in contributing. We now work in a different kind of environment where actually we're in more of a knowledge-based economy. And we see this across all industries, but healthcare in particular. People want to come to work and they want to contribute. They don't want to they want to just be told what to do. They want to use their brains and they want to have influence over what's happening. Healthcare is a complex adaptive system, but there are also the elements of healthcare which are consistent and repetitive. And rather than striving for just efficiency and striving towards that finite thinking from an efficiency perspective, how do we build this finite thinking and how do we build a continuous improvement mindset as we go? This is really reflected in some work done, really great book by Amy Edmondson, a Harvard professor. It's called Teaming, really great book. She frames it in terms of, do we organise to learn or do we organise to execute? So that's in terms of when we set up our improvement work or we create pathways or we set up new services, are we organising that in terms of we are prepared to learn as we go? Or are we setting it up in terms of, are we looking to organise it so we can execute it straight away? Back to an example I shared with you, I think the previous session was about how Toyota took 9 months to develop the hybrid engine. That's very much around how to organise to learn so you can get to the point, whereas rather than spending loads of time organising to actually deliver, you're in the organised to execute mindset. As you move that on then to execute to learn, as you move into the actual doing bit here, into the red work, are we thinking in terms of execute to learn or execute for efficiency in the Taylorism mindset that I was talking about there? Executing to learn, again, is continuing the learning and the continuous improvement mindset, how we move into delivery, but being open-minded enough to accept that things may change as we go. We're very much in that we are thinking about becoming efficient and thinking about executing to the best we possibly can, but without in that kind of learning mindset. And this reflects back to, I shared this slide with you, I think, on the first section, very much around the work of David Marquet, and back to that industrial age thinking of red workers and blue workers. And that we think in terms of our red workers, the workers are the people that fulfill the tasks, and the blue workers are our bosses, and the bosses and the higher ups are the ones that come with the solutions. And now we're thinking more in terms of, in that knowledge-based economy, people want to contribute and want to take a part of each of this. So again, continuous improvement thinks about red work, but also building in blue work as well. This session really wants to focus on, we talked about last month, the journey, not the destination, creating your improvement roadmap. So going back to the point that I made about Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind. It's the end that I now want to talk about. It's the destination. How do we set our aims and our objectives in our improvement work? So thinking about your Line 16 Improvement projects, what do your aims currently look like? Are they bold enough? Are they brave enough? I sometimes think that we're not bold or brave enough when we set our improvement aims. Sometimes we set our improvement aims based on what we think we can achieve rather than what we want to achieve, and we build in existing constraints within our thinking. And I just think we have to do better than that. We have to be bolder than that. And I was speaking to people regularly about what are your improvement aims. I'm a big driver behind that. Really understand what your improvement aims are. And sometimes they're quite tepid because we're worried about failing and we're worried about not achieving those aims and demoralizing people. But I just think we can do better. And using this quote from Einstein, we can't solve our problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. And I get that a lot of people will tell me you can't be perfect. You know, there's plenty of quotes out there about perfection is the enemy of good. You know, perfection is unachievable. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying aim for perfection, see what you can get. As JRD Tata talks about here, you know, global industry leader, he talks about aiming perfection, see how close to that we can get. Of course, in crisis situations, I hear this regularly, particularly through the pandemic. You're not looking for continuous improvement. You're looking for a response. So yes, in that circumstances, then perfection is the enemy of good. If you attend a cardiac arrest, you're not going to go through a continuous improvement mindset. You're going to deal with the situation you need to. It's not going to have to be perfect. But as we set our improvement aims where we want to get to, which may take a little bit longer than initial aim, we should be bolder and braver in our ambition. And that will drive us towards something called zero defects. And I talk about this a lot, about how we think about zero defects in our work and not accepting any level of defect, or at least striving towards levels of achieving zero defect in our work. So you think, how do we do that? Mistakes happen. We know mistakes happen. We're only human. We're fallible. We make mistakes. The difference between a mistake and a defect is a mistake that's been passed on or repeated time and time again. It then becomes a defect because we're making the same mistakes over and over again. Zero defects drives us towards how can we avoid passing those mistakes on. So the mistake may be passed on to the next person down the line. You've done your bit of the work, you passed the work on, and now it's somebody else's. And you may have incompletely filled out a form or incompletely filled out a database. Somebody else has got to pick that up. That becomes a defect. In worse situations, it gets to the patient and they experience the defect. That maybe an outpatient letter has been sent out incorrectly, gone to the wrong patient. Nobody's going to pick that up. It's the patient that picks up that mistake, and that becomes a defect. I'm going to give you some examples now about how we can think about things slightly differently, and how we can strive towards this, and how we can use things that we're quite familiar with, but just reframe them and think slightly differently. So we're very familiar with this term, first do no harm. Very commonly recognised across healthcare globally, or everyone recognises. This was reframed and retranslated to me by a guy called Henry Otero, who's a medical oncologist. Met him a few years ago. Really great improver, clinical improver, and he translated into this: our first priority is zero defects. So taking something we all recognise as being true and we believe in, and turn that into our first priority is zero defects, and how we should be striving towards zero defects. While we may accept the one on the left, we don't always accept the one on the right because we think it's not achievable. But a really great example of this is something I was involved in. I used to work for a really great director of infection prevention control, consultant microbiologist, amazing person who was so inspirational. And this was a period of time when healthcare acquired infections were high, and there's a national drive towards reducing that or eliminating that. The organisation I was working for at that point in time was running about 60 plus MRSA bacteremia a year. And there wasn't at that point there was an acceptance that patients get infections. It's one of those things. It's a hospital. It's not safe. We know that now. We want to get patients home or back to their usual place of residence as soon as possible because it's the right thing to do. But we were talking about that was very common around infections, that it was just one of those things. It was an acceptable defect at that point. But there was a real drive from this consultant microbiologist I was working for that that's just not acceptable. We should be looking for zero number of MRSA bacteremia infections in the organisation. There was talk about, well, let's halve it. Let's halve the numbers. Wouldn't that be great? But we're still accepting 30 a year. 30 patients are going to get infected. But why would we allow that? So there's a real drive to that. And actually changing that mindset drove numbers down. And within 18 months, it was at zero. because there's just a non-acceptance of defect in that process. Occasionally, a month we would get 1 or 2 cases, and that was seen as a very much a negative thing. And using Spencer's session from last month, we do root cause analysis, understand why, learn, and then implement that later on. This was just about not accepting any level of defect and striving towards 0 defects and see how close we can get. This often finds that we don't see the whole picture, and it's how the numbers are often presented towards us and how we translate that. The example I showed you before, we were just running at about 60 odd MRSA bacterial infections a year. When we turn that into, we're talking about patients here, not just numbers. Numbers are easy to turn into the abstract, and patients, you don't see the patient anymore. You see numbers and percentages. So I wanted to show you a few examples, which hopefully will, if you're not convinced yet, then maybe these will convince you. So I just did a trawl on the internet of some quality accounts or annual reports that I found, and this is just I picked a medium-sized hospital in England just to give some examples. And these just so you can see them, I picked the cancer waiting times. As usual, there's a whole page of KPIs that they're trying to achieve. So here, what we find here is a lovely, colourful, completely ineffectual waste of time rag rating on the right hand side. Doesn't do anything, just tells you that, oh, doesn't it look nice? Actually, we're quite green here, and therefore things are okay. There's a bit of amber, but not too bad. And those red ones, that's not great, is it? Well, if we cross our fingers and hope for the best, and maybe with a fair wind next month, those numbers may be different. But we probably won't do anything fundamentally different to change that. What struck me more than anything else was the threshold column. So this organisation used the term performing rather than target. I'm sure there's some thinking behind that. But if you take the top one, for example, the 2-week wait GP referral, national target 93%. We're building in a 7% defect rate on that metric. So we've set ourselves a target, believing this is what we want to achieve. We believe that a 2-week GP referral to first outpatient appointment is the right thing to do for patients. But we're already building in a 7% defect rate on that one. 7% of patients, oh well, it's one of those things, can't be helped. This organisation isn't even achieving the 93%, but it's turned it amber to show that it's not bad, it's not good because you haven't achieved it, but it's kind of middling a bit there. So it's accepting an even greater level of defect. So think about the patients in this, just writing them off, so it doesn't matter. The more striking for me probably is the bottom one. There, the 62-day referral to treatment. There's a target there of 85%. So a 15% defect rate, we're accepting, just nominally accepting this 15% defect rate. But the performance of that organisation is green, and it's 86%. So over 13% of patients are just, well, it doesn't really matter if we don't achieve it or not because we've got green. And if you're responsible for these metrics, you're very happy. I know some people on the call who have been previously involved in cancer metrics, and you'd be really happy with some of those that have gone green. But there's still levels of defect in there, and we're accepting those levels of defect. So I'm encouraging that a slightly different way of thinking, looking at those percentages, thinking, what does the numbers translate to? And again, digging around a little bit more, I found another organisation and just extracted some numbers. And again, if I didn't convince you on the last slide, then maybe I will with this one about how we strive towards continuous improvement and how we aim for perfection. So if we're running 95%, and again, those of you on the call who are mired in either 4-hour standard access or RTT or cancer or whatever performance you're trying to achieve, you'll be very happy with 95%. You'd be you left work every day and you're operating at 95%. Your organisation would be very happy. You'd be quite happy as well. But if we're operating 95% based on the numbers that I picked up on a weekly basis, the 4-hour standard, 178 patients a week still wouldn't achieve that standard that we set, that we believe is the right thing to do for our patients. 178. 42 patients wouldn't be handed over within 15 minutes. 54 patients would fall based on the number of emergency admissions, so the percentage. And 401 outpatient appointments would have some kind of defect. So whether the letter didn't arrive or the clinic was cancelled, 401 patients a week would have some kind of defective process. 29 patients a week wouldn't achieve the 2-week wait cancer referral target. And this is if we're operating at 95%. So the national target is 93%. So I'm pushing it even further. But we're still accepting that 29 patients a week doesn't matter because based on the other table, we'd have hit green. And that would be the most important thing at the moment. We're not translating this, as I said before, percentages lead to us thinking about patients in the abstract. then this is where I start thinking about how we drive for 0 defects and how we drive for perfection, and see how close we can get to that, and not building in defects or not building in contingencies or leeway into our aims. Our aims have to be better. So taking this to the ridiculous, to the 99%, you know, clearly if any of us here were operating our systems at 99%, we would be, this is utopia. You know, this is almost perfection. This is 1% off perfection. I just want to tell you what that looks like in terms of numbers. So even if we're operating 99%, this organisation would still have 35 patients a week that didn't achieve the 4-hour standard. Again, I keep on repeating, this is a standard that we set as what we want to achieve for all our patients. So 35 wouldn't. 9 patients wouldn't be handed over 15 minutes. 11 patients would still fall. There'd be 80 defects in the outpatient appointment. And 6 patients a week would still not be referred within 2 weeks. That's if we're operating at 99%. So tell me now why we shouldn't be aiming for 0 defects, or tell me why we shouldn't be striving for perfection, see how close we get. Why are we building in an acceptable level of defects at 93% or 95%? When we can see now, you know, looking at the numbers, we wouldn't be happy if this was us or our family or any relatives or people that we know. We wouldn't be happy if we were one of those 6. They're on a referral from the GP and it doesn't get picked up within 2 weeks. We wouldn't be happy with that. But we're building in because we believe we should aim for what's achievable rather than what we want to achieve. So you look at those numbers again with that kind of thinking in mind, just looking down that thresholds column, and the level of defect and level of leeway we're building in, it slightly looks a bit different now. It almost looks a little bit, for me, it's not right. Our aim should be better than just accepting 6, 7, 4, 3, 2, 7% defect within our processes. So when you think about your improvement aims, how do you drive that forward? How do you be bold? How do you be brave in setting those aims? Heard from a great clinician this morning, a guy called Ian Sturgis, who was talking about exactly that in an organisation he's working at the moment. Really, that organisation is really keen to develop a really great clinical service, not just based on the satisfactory, not just based on hitting certain targets, but actually delivering the best that they possibly can. When you look at these quotes again, I'm not quite sure whether they were as unachievable as we first thought. That's what I believe. You may completely disagree with me, and feel free to drop me an email or put a comment in the chat if you want. If you don't agree with me, but I think these kind of ring more true. That we have to think differently, and we have to think around what our aims and our objectives are, and let's strive for perfection and see how far we get. A mechanism that helps us avoid those mistakes in the first place is something called mistake proofing. So it's a strategy that we can utilize, and I'm going to obviously I'll share all the slides with you. There's a bit more detail in the slides, but I'm going to run through really quickly about what mistake proofing means. I mean, it's kind of obvious really, but it stops the mistake happening in the first place, which then turns into a defect. So it's changing the way of thinking. There's a great poem. As I said, I'll share the slides. There's a link there on the slide to download the full text. It's a guy called Joseph Mullins. It's called The Ambulance or the Fence. It's Joseph Mullins from 1895. 'Twas a dangerous cliff, as they freely confessed, though to walk near its crest was so pleasant. But over its terrible edge there'd slipped a duke and many a peasant. So the people said something would have to be done, but their projects did not at all tally. Some said, put a fence around the edge of the cliff. Some, an ambulance down in the valley. So I was in an organisation last year, and I was walking down the corridor, and I saw some buckets on the corridor catching rainwater from a leak in the roof. And I went back a few weeks later, and there was more buckets on the corridor catching more rainwater. And I thought, do we invest our money in more buckets, or do we think about fixing the roof? And it kind of took me back to the ambulance or the fence analogy. Do we mop up the mistakes that we make at the end, or do we try and avoid them in the first place? And here are some levels, and you'll get a chance to sort of have these on the slides later on. Here are some levels to those mistake proofing strategy, and these are tools that have been used across a number of industries previously. So what I'm sharing with you now is some of that information. So what we're talking about is a level 1, no inspection. We generally just hoping for the best, that we don't make mistakes. There's no inspection built in. This is very much in the checking for defects environment. Level 2 is next level up. It's end of line inspection. So this could be an audit that you do. The mistake has already happened. This could be a CQC inspection. It's anything that has, once the mistake has happened, or the defect has happened, then you're capturing it later on. Classic way of doing audit in this respect, the classic way of how we build in learning in the NHS. Self-inspection with judgment. So what that is the mistake gets passed on to the next person, but the next person is able to pick it up and rectify it. It doesn't get straight through to the patient. There's another step in the process. That person is going to be picking up your mistakes though. So that person is going to be fed up with you after a while because they're going to be rectifying your issues. Level 4 takes us on to the point where that person, the successive check, can then feed back straight away to you to tell you that there's a mistake. And think about these in terms of maybe a pharmacy technician has picked prescriptions, fulfilled the script, it's gone to the pharmacist for checking. There's a mistake. The pharmacist can give immediate feedback straight away to the technician to give that and to rectify the mistake and to learn from that mistake straight away. It's not something that's captured later on. We don't do an audit of the number of mistakes of medication errors that got through to the patient. It's picked up straight away. Level 5 is self-inspection with warning. So this could be something that like an alarm that goes off, or there's an intervention, but it doesn't stop you from progressing. So it could be that something pops up if you're entering data, something pops up on the screen, tells you you've forgotten to do something, but you can clear that error and carry on anyway. That's a self-inspection with warning. It could be an alarm that goes off, but you're able to silence the alarm. It tells you that a mistake has been made, but you're able to clear it. The highest level, which moves into preventing mistakes, is level 6. And this is self-inspection with control. These are in situations like, there's an alert, there's an alarm, but it doesn't allow you to progress. So it could be there's an alarm on an infusion pump, there's some air in the line. It doesn't allow you to clear that alarm or to continue the infusion until you've cleared the mistake. If anyone's ever used a little vital pack or other devices to collect observation data for patients, you can't progress on to the next stage until you completed all the data. It doesn't allow you to move on. So that's a self-inspection with some control built in. In more of a domestic setting, your washing machine won't work until the door's closed, unless you've got a really old washing machine. That stops you making a mistake and turn the washing machine and all the water flooding out. There's a control that stops you moving on. Similarly, some of you will have a car where you have to put your foot in the clutch to start the engine. That avoids you having a situation where you try and start the engine with the car in gear and lurching forward. So there are many examples of that. Thinking about how you apply these mistake-proofing methodology, that's the bit where you move to thinking about zero defects, not just mopping up the errors in the end, is how you avoid them in the first place. So I'll share these with you on the slides to say there's a table there around some bit more detail around that process. Finally, the last thing I want to sort of share and sort of talk about now is the kind of mindset that we will find ourselves in to allow us to get to the point where we're thinking in terms of zero defects and mistake proofing. And some brilliant work by a guy called Adam Grant, organizational psychologist from Wharton Business School, book called Think Again. And he says many of us fail to rethink our beliefs and opinions because we get stuck in overconfidence cycles. And this is so true when you see defects that get passed on, or we find ourselves where we can't seem to improve. Some individuals are stuck in these overconfidence cycles of we just believe it's the right thing to do, and we get stuck in the courage of our convictions, and that moves into that confirmation or desire. We really want this to work, so we're really going to see it through, and by God, we're going to see it through. And that's sort of we then end up with mechanisms where we're validating our work and we're in a prove it mindset. We're trying to find data that isn't there, but we'll push it through, and that again back into that cycle again of overconfidence, rather thinking in terms of rethinking cycles where we start from a position of humility, open-minded, continuous improvement, open to new ideas, new suggestions, curious to find how things could be better, and then you move into discovery and then background through humility. We all work in a scientific environment. Healthcare is a scientific environment based on hypotheses and experiments. And what I've underlined underneath, scientific thinking favours humility over pride, doubt over certainty, and curiosity over closure. It's that thinking in terms of we want to try experiments, we want to think differently. It's continuous improvement. It's infinite thinking rather than that closed, finite thinking. And at the top, if knowledge is power, knowing what we don't know is wisdom. And we can get stuck in these overconfidence cycles of thinking we know more than we do, rather than being humble and recognising things that we don't know. So things that I know is quite small. Things that I don't know is massive. There is so much I don't know. But when we work in a bubble or work in a small frame of reference, we start to believe that we're experts in that world, and we get into those overconfidence cycles. So think about where you are. When I speak to people and they're absolutely certain about they're right, I ask them, where's your evidence? What backs that up? What tells you that you're right? Is it just that you think you're right, or is it there's something that backs that up? Thank you very much for your time again today. It's been a fast and furious session, but I wanted to share some of that stuff with you just to get some of that thinking across. Very much around creating that continuous improvement mindset rather than that fixed finite thinking, transferring from what may be seen as sometimes quality improvement projects into being bold around some of our improvement aims. So session takeaways for me are today: aim for perfection, achieve excellence, be bold, be brave. Infinite thinking, not finite thinking. Working in terms of monthly targets, and that's all you think about. Yes, I know you have to hit those targets. They're there. We can't get away from them. But how can we think differently? Organize to learn, open to new ideas, execute to learn, continuous improvement mindset. Avoid getting stuck in overconfidence cycles. Again, if you think you're right, what is your evidence? As usual, reference for this week, 3 great books: Infinite Game by Simon Sinek, Think Again by Adam Grant, and the really great book by Amy Edmondson, Teaming, which is probably if I'm going to prioritize any of them, it'd probably be that one from Amy Edmondson. So thank you very much again for your time this month. I'm going to take a month off next month, so we're not around for August. But any comments, any suggestions, any ideas, any feedback, disagree with me, agree with me, whatever, that's what we're here for. That's what we discuss, that debate. As I said before, I'm not right. I could be very wrong on this one, but tell me. Contact details are on the front now, email address, Twitter account, and the ECS Network Twitter account is there as well. But for now, enjoy your afternoon, stay cool, plenty of fluids, and I'll see you all in September. Bye for now.